Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 8th Jaipuria podcast. We have with us an esteemed journalist of Lucknow, Mr. Atul Chandra, who has headed Lucknow's biggest newspaper publication, The Times of India, for a very long time in his career. And he is here to share with us his insights on leadership, on management, and on various aspects of life that he has gleaned through his enormous years of experience. Hello, Mr. Atul Chandra. Welcome.
Hello, Professor Pradhan. It's really a very joyous moment for me to be here with you, and I look forward to your questions.
So let's fire away without any hesitation. So my first question to you, sir, is that in this highly competitive environment where we live, what we find is that information has become a new commodity. The very idea of information, knowledge, spreading of knowledge, media has become the latest commodity. So you, as someone who has seen the various forms of media change all those years, you started at a time when typewriting must have been the main method. Then came the computers, then comes the internet, then comes the smartphone, and now we have the elephant in the room, the generative AI. So my first question to you is, what do you think about generative AI? A lot of our students are prioritizing its use because, well, it helps them make their assignments, it helps them make their projects, and many of them feel that writing now does not really involve human ingenuity and effort. What all that matters is hitting the prompt. So do you think that in the profession that is most concerned with the spread of information, which is the media, that this generative AI can truly replace us or not?
Generative AI can replace us, replace the human part of the media industry, but then it will have disastrous consequences. For example, that if I am writing something, I apply my mind. I try and recall some quote from somewhere, put it in my writing. And if I'm not doing all that, then perhaps you must have read recently Oxford University Dictionary's latest term, word of the year, brain rot. Too much of digitalization is going to lead to brain rot, which I did not realize first, but after reading this, the meaning of this word, this is what will happen. Your brain or the journalist's brain, which is supposed to be, should be active and should be looking for ideas, past references. So unless you use your mind to feed that information in ChatGPT or whatever, you won't be able to get the kind of result which perhaps you would get by using your mind independently, independent of this technology. So in that event, whatever you produce will be very impersonal.
Okay. But I had a question. So with every new invention, with every new innovation, with every new advancement in media technology, those who are part of the old guard, they tend to look at it with skepticism. For example, Socrates, the first greatest philosopher in history, he, you may not, very few people know, but he had a big problem with writing. He said that when writing, imagine something that we take for granted, the foundation of our education system globally is writing. And he said that if people start writing, they will cease to memorize things. Similarly, when the television was invented, people said that if people are able to watch audio-visual media on a regular basis, then they will stop thinking, they will stop writing. Over here, writing became what they try to defend. So, do you feel that perhaps our resistance to generative AI, as opposed to Generation Z, Gen Z, which is the youngest generation, the ones that are in colleges today, do you feel that perhaps we have a predisposition to be against generative AI because it is something different from our time? Or do you think that there's a genuine element of brain rot involved which goes beyond mere generational shift?
Let me cite an example.
Yes.
My generation
Right.
We grew up writing letters
Right.
using pens. Okay? Now, how many of us use pens, fountain pens, jotters, whatever? We have almost stopped using them except for signatures somewhere, unless we are using digital signatures.
Right.
Okay? So, when computers came, nobody resisted. I mean, there was some resistance the from journalists thinking that it'll cut down jobs and there'll be more machines than human beings. No, but I have seen this happen. Now it's very difficult for me to write a few lines holding a pen,
Right.
but on a computer, I can do that easily. Likewise, with generative AI, it is not that there is complete resistance to it. There's an element of fear. There is a debate on that fear, and some people are very vocal about what it is going to do to the industry, or not just media, but any industry.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there is a churning going on. At the same time, we cannot stop change from happening. Generative AI will take over one day. Whether bots will run newsrooms, that is another issue.
Right.
But it will creep in. Nobody can stop it from that.
So this is a pattern that has been occurring in history before. There's always a little bit of resistance, but eventually it gets amalgamated, and within 10-20 years we all forget about the resistance that we had. So in that sense, maybe it looks like a big deal today, but we are all going to get used to it, for good or ill. There's a positive way we can use everything and a negative way. So my second question to you is, which is, I would say, very crucial in the management scenario today, is that what do you feel about stress management and time management? Because, so for example, in the media, there's immense stress, right? There's immense time constraint. You have to take out the copy, you have to take out the print, the paper has to go for printing before midnight, and it just has to be done. There is no, you can't say ki aadha ghanta baad, and you know. But so a lot of young people today, they have, you can say, they have attention span issues. We all, and this is with everyone, with social media, with getting quick feedback on YouTube, etc. We want to quickly go from one thing to the next. So we have trouble sticking to things, and at the same time we have trouble in dealing with stress, because with social media we all feel that the other person is having a great life, and that is stress. If you may recall, there was a death that occurred recently of a person due to overwork and overstress. Narayan Murthy said that 70-hour work week should be the norm if India needs to progress. There was news from someone in the States also, and who is now talking of an 84-hour week. 84-hour week, that's the latest in the news. Now, to someone who, like you, who has dealt with time management and obviously plenty of stress that goes with it throughout your life, what would be your advice to those people who are in their early 20s today, because they are just starting their career and they already have this burden of attention span issues along with stress? So what would your advice be if a 20-year-old asked you today?
See, one has to learn to deal with both the situations.
Right.
I'll give you my example. When I started my career in 1976, I and a group of other journalists, they were assigned proofreading work. And in those days, UP board results used to be published by my newspaper. So the exercise of, typing the result, printing it, and then proofreading those sheets,
Right.
making sure that there's no error, because the future of a student is involved. And that process used to take 48 to 52, 54 hours at a stretch. We used to sit through the night, take a short break, and then again get on with the work. The word stress was non-existent then.
Right.
It is a modern terminology
Right.
because we have not been able to strike a balance
Right.
between life and work. It is true there's a deadline, and you have to meet a deadline, because if the product is delayed, then there are no takers. The hawkers just leave the newspaper and go away. But then I've seen this in Delhi, that the work happens very smoothly. So it all has to be streamlined in a way that there's no stress on the staff. It happens because of staff shortage most of the times, which may happen due to non-recruitment by the management, or because of people taking leave at short notice. So two persons' work has to be shared by one person, and he has to ensure that everything is fine. So all that happens. Yes, there is stress. There is stress of what is going into print. That is a bigger stress. Ensuring that there's nothing libelous going into print against anyone. So all those things, if handled properly, perhaps it's not that strenuous. But I still will say that there is a certain amount of stress, because you get pressure from the government, from the advertiser, from the circulation people, and from the readers. So managing everything requires some mental strength, you can say. Whether you achieve that through meditation or prayers or sleep, that's up to you.
So I would say that perhaps bite the bullet. That if you have taken an assignment, if you've taken a project, if you have a deadline,
If I'm in this profession, then I have to deal with whatever comes my way. Sorry to interrupt you, but then that is how I look at it.
there is no shortcut. There is no shortcut. And there is no substitute for hard work. Because I feel that, for example, the young generation, they do work hard. They do have, a zeal to excel in life. But I think very interesting point, you said that this concept of stress did not exist back in the day. So I think it's also this new vocabulary, this new internet flow on psychological stress and all these things, all the literature that is produced, that is perhaps leading to an overthinking on the part of everyone. And that is why in the contemplative state, all this seems like a big deal. But once you start working, it totally goes away from the scene. Totally goes away. For example, once in my personal experience, I've seen the moment you start working on something, the time goes away. You don't feel time when you're working it. But when you are not working, that is when you start thinking, oh, this is the time, it's getting late, this, that. Okay, so my last and final question to you, and I would say this is very, very significant, not just for management students, but for our society as a whole, is journalists deal with interaction, with society, social interaction in a non-transactional basis. So for example, doctors deal with society at large, but there is a transaction. They provide a service and they get exchange for that. Teachers also deal with society, but there's also a transaction. We impart knowledge and they impart whatever remuneration we get. Journalists, on the other hand, they don't deal with society in an exchange sort of way, but they have to be completely in tune with what is happening in society, because our entire public perception of what is happening in the world around us actually comes from the newspapers and the media. It is only because we read the news that we know what is happening, and we live in that psychological framework where we actually live in the country at large. So what would you feel is the hallmark of Indian society and culture? Even the work culture. Having studied our society for so many years, having seen the hinterlands of Uttar Pradesh, even Jharkhand, you have seen closely. So, my question is, what would you feel is the hallmark of our society and culture? Without, of course, getting into political controversy as much as we can.
See, the society itself draws a boundary for us to ensure that a journalist profession is non-transactional.
Right.
But there are elements who try to corrupt it.
Right.
So at that point, the individual is responsible whether he's making it transactional or he's honest to the ethics and moral values. In that regard, I would say that the moral fiber of the society, that plays an important role. The kind of corruption that we see now was not there earlier. It is not that everybody was a holy cow.
Right.
But the depth to which the rot has set in was not like this in those days. And even later, when I was heading Times of India editorial team, I did not get any complaint against any of my colleagues who was in the reporting field. Not one. And that was my greatest strength. So the society also respects you for that. And they expect you to be ethical. That is where the society becomes important, and that is how I look at society's contribution towards making me a good journalist, I would say.
So it is the social aspect is what drove your ethics in work. It is the influence.
Social as well as my my upbringing, I would say.
So because India's hallmark of, India's, for example, our Indian independence movement, it was all based on ethics. It was all based on morality. The level at which they tried to aspire is rarely has been seen across history. So perhaps our greatest strength still is the ethical framework, which may or may not be under attack. Because you said corruption has gone up.
Definition of ethics and moral values
Also
is different for different people.
Right.
So,
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Atul Chandra. Thank you very much for your valuable insight.
thank you, Professor Mrinal Pradhan. Nice talk we had.
Thank you so much. Our students would love listening to your lessons, all about generative AI, about stress management, time management, about Indian society. And thank you so much for coming with us.
I'll be glad if it is of help to them. Thank you.